Hi everyone, it's Danny. Alrighty, today we're going to discuss a little bit more about orchid fragrance, particularly how it can vary. And this is because my viewer Astrid has asked me something related to this, and I know I made a video on orchid fragrance in the past, but this is a bit different. So I will tell you today, based on the orchids that I had and the cases that I had, how fragrance can vary and what factors actually influence it. Now, first off, the age of the orchid. This can actually influence fragrance quite a lot, particularly if you have a very young plant which blooms for the first time. As you might know, blooms might not be as showy, or the flower spike, the inflorescence might not be as big as expected when dealing with a very young orchid, but fragrance is affected as well. The best example that I have is the Rincorita's Bangkok Sunset. In any case, this orchid was young, so the first time it bloomed, it had absolutely no fragrance at all. Although this orchid was advertised to be fragrant, and I was a bit disappointed. Now, the second flowering came with much beautiful flowers and also a fragrance, which was more than I actually expected from this orchid. And the flowers that followed were indeed fragrant as well. So this orchid took some time to adapt to the new environment, to how her flowers should be, and all the flowerings ever since have been very nicely fragrant. So first thing that can influence the fragrance of an orchid is its age. The younger the orchid, the more prone it is to not release the full potential of its fragrance or not release it at all. Now, second factor is season. There are some orchids which tend to prefer particular growing conditions, like in the case of Nellie Eiler. She is actually a cool grower and she struggles a bit in my summers, but she's pulling through. She is pretty hardy in that respect. But because she does like cooler temperatures, she has a much better fragrance in wintertime for me. She can actually fill up the balcony. Right now, even though I can definitely feel her fragrance, it's really not filling up my balcony. It is not as strong as the fragrance she releases in colder temperatures, which incidentally occur in my winter time. Now, this particular one does not have a blooming season per se. She can bloom throughout the year whenever a pseudobulb matures, but whenever I had a Nellie Eiler in bloom in winter time in cooler conditions, I had a much better fragrance as well. Now, another major factor that can influence fragrance is health. You might have an orchid which bloomed the previous years beautifully, had a wonderful fragrance. Something might have happened in the meantime, and her next bloom will not be as fragrant as the blooms you are acquainted with. This is because the orchid went through some trouble. She is spending quite a lot of energy in producing a new root system, if it's the case, or new foliage, depends. That surely does not give out as much energy to the blooms. So the blooms might actually be smaller in numbers as well, and also lack the fragrance you are used to. So I would say that the third major factor that makes fragrance variable is the health of the orchid. Fourth factor which can influence fragrance is genetics. Unfortunately, we cannot do much here. So I have an example, the Hanswelli Eiler orchid. This one for me does not have any fragrance, but for other people it might have a fragrance. Some say that this orchid does indeed have a fragrance. Now, somewhere in her parentage she might have a fragrant parent, but because seeds can vary greatly from one to another, even though you might not notice the difference physically, let's say, fragrance might lack in some individuals. So this is one example that I have, and also a second example is the Tahitian Dancer, which is advertised in some cases to be fragrant. Mine has never been fragrant. No matter how much wishful thinking I have, she is definitely not fragrant. So fourth factor is indeed genetics. This is not as widely spread, particularly with hybrids. Usually a hybrid that is selected in a particular way will have a fragrance, but from time to time you can find the odd hybrids which have a variable scent. And when we speak about species, there can be great variety between them. Like I have an example with the Encyclia cordigera. If you remember, her blooms were a particular color pattern. Her fragrance is a particular color pattern as well. It is not as intense, it might not be as sweet as other specimens from the Encyclia cordigera family. And this is because the species itself is variable. So the fragrance will vary accordingly. Some cordigeras will smell all day. Some will smell like roses, some will smell like chocolate, some will smell like a combination. My particular one smells like a combination of chocolate and something floral, but I cannot say it's rosy. So when dealing with species in particular, there can be quite a lot of variety between them. And of course, lastly, the external factors like light, temperature, hydration, if the orchid is newly introduced in your environment, and so on. These are topics that I actually covered in my previous video, which you can find here actually, so I will not go into them. But for the main part, an orchid that adapts to an environment might lack fragrance for quite a while. Orchids which are not hydrated might not release fragrance. Orchids which prefer bright light and suddenly they don't receive bright light anymore might have a decrease in fragrance and intensity and so on. But these again are external factors. They don't necessarily affect the orchid on the long term. Okay everyone, I hope you found this useful. If you liked this video, then please give it a like and share it with your friends. If you'd like to see more orchid videos from me, just subscribe to my channel. I post daily. You can also leave me your questions and suggestions in the comment section below and I'll get back to you or make a video for you guys. If you click on the left side of your screen, you will be directed to orchidnature.com, where you'll find care sheets, identification sheets, or you can talk to us in the forum section. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye!